There is a moment near the beginning of Hollow Knight where I knew I was going to love it. The game opens with a quick cinematic introducing your character before dropping you into a pit. Immediately, you get the sense that this is an old and unwelcoming place, like it's been a long time since anybody has come this way. Then you encounter the locals. Maybe you can get yourself past the first few without problems, but eventually, this happens. From the moment I first took damage, I feared death. The slowdown, the visuals, and the sound effects all together make you really feel the impact. And if they made taking damage so important, I could only imagine what would happen if I died. Would I just respawn? How much progress do you lose? Is death permanent? I knew nothing about this game going in, and my first few moments taught me, if nothing else, that this world is dangerous and challenging, and this tension followed me through the entire game. Hollow Knight is a Kickstarter-funded game by Team Cherry Games. It raised about $57,000 Canadian by December 2014. It was then released 2 years later in February 2017. It features hand-drawn artwork, a fantastic soundtrack, and very challenging platforming. The game can be described as a Metroidvania, as you're exploring a single large, expansive world that you'll backtrack through as you acquire new skills that help you progress. And reception to Hollow Knight has been fantastic. But I'd still like to offer my own thoughts on this game and its excellent level design. So let's see what Hollow Knight's all about. Hollow Knight is an adventure platformer. You are given simple but well-executed controls to play with. You can run, you can attack, and you can jump. You can control the arc and duration of your jump, and your attacks can go left, right, up, or down when you're midair. Attacking has a bit of a delay that enemies will often get through if you try to button mash, so you'll do well to time your attacks correctly. Attacking will also knock you back a bit. If you stand still and attack the same enemy, you'll find yourself being pushed back. This forces you to constantly push forward into the enemy as you're attacking, meaning, again, you need to time your attacks so you don't kill yourself. And that's basically it for the controls. It's basic, but with a lot of room to master. As you progress, you'll unlock further mechanics that will not only help you fight, but allow you to reach new areas, lending to this game's Metroidvania label. Some abilities are pretty situational, but others you'll find will transform how you play and handle combat completely. So much so that if you go back and replay the game from the beginning, you might find yourself thinking, well, why can't they just give me those abilities? Something like dashing seems like it should be a core mechanic, not an unlockable. Is that a criticism of their design? Well, I think that's really a matter of opinion. Personally, I'd like that you're required to go through some level of mastery over your basic skills before you get access to the more advanced stuff, especially since all of the skills in the game are mobility focused, whether it's dashing or wall jumping. Back onto this game's Metroidvania label for a second. Personally, I think this game has a lot more akin to Dark Souls, with its brooding atmosphere, the crumbling and well-aged kingdom you explore, and the deterioration of its people due to a curious affliction. Especially with how the story is told in small, cryptic pieces scattered among different people you meet and the environments. So it's kind of a Souls-like? It doesn't have the stamina management or combat systems like other so-called Souls-likes do, but I'd argue that Hollow Knight captures the feel of Dark Souls just as well, if not better, than a lot of the other games we've seen crop up over the last few years. Back to the game, there's also an interesting dynamic with the magic system called, well, souls, that you mainly gain by attacking enemies. You will unlock soul spells as you progress in the game, but in the beginning, you're only given the ability to recover health by spending souls. Healing this way requires you to sit in place and charge for a few seconds, leaving you vulnerable to attack. I love this dynamic because you constantly have to balance being aggressive to gain more souls and then pulling back to spend those souls to heal. And the risk of taking damage while healing means that in the middle of a fight, you really can't afford to play passively. When you're low on health, this game gets very intense. Some of my favorite moments in the game were when I was lost, low health, and just trying to survive until I could find a safe point. There's also an extra level of complexity and customization through the charm system. As you play, you'll collect these little bonuses that you can equip to tweak the game. Extra health, faster attacks, bad smell. You can only equip a few, so you have to really strategize your build to suit different situations and your own playstyle. And then finally, the enemies. They are your main obstacle in the game, and they don't go easy on you. This is a hostile and unwelcoming world, and all the enemies you encounter are designed to constantly surprise and kill you. Even when you think you know what to expect, you often don't. It's hard, and a lot of the enemies straight up kick my ass. But getting past these obstacles, mastering their behaviors, and getting more skilled at the game is very satisfying. You know, if it was just the excellent gameplay this game gets right and nothing else, I would probably still rate it very highly. But my god, the soundtrack for this game is phenomenal. The composer is Christopher Larkin, who has previously made music for the indie game Expand. His work in Hollow Knight hits all the emotional tones for the world and truly brings it to life. I think the soundtrack first struck me in awe when I entered Green Path, the second main area of the game. It was such a departure from what the game had been so far. Dirtmouth was somber and it felt hopeless. While Crossroads felt mysterious but hostile, reminding me that I needed to be cautious. Or maybe I was still just afraid of death like a coward. But Green Path was pleasant and lively. It made me feel like the world wasn't so desolate and scary, that there was something worth fighting for here. And my god, the orchestral transitions between rooms are done so well. If you listen to the soundtrack, you'll find that all the songs or regions go through different movements. They start lightly and then build up in intensity. Each of these movements are what play in different rooms of the game. So the starting areas always start light, and as you explore further, the music builds with you. It can also act as an indicator for your level progression and where you're headed. As the music starts building, you start to feel tense and you know that you're treading dangerous grounds. There could be a challenge room or a mini-boss lurking nearby. And as the music fades away, you're probably near safer areas, maybe even the region borders. It provides some context to orient yourself in the world. The music is simply beautiful. And don't get me wrong, the other audio aspects of this game work well too. Hitting enemies and objects with your weapons always sounds punchy and helps indicate if you hit to damage or was deflected. And you can often anticipate what enemies are around you by their unique sounds before they appear on the screen. Something interesting I noticed as I was listening to the soundtrack again is that certain melodic phrases start to stand out. For instance, City of Tears was wrapped around this theme. Which appears later in the Soul Sanctum, located within City of Tears. Doing some more digging, I came across Christopher Larkin's YouTube channel where he had an interview hosted about him and the soundtrack, and sure enough, this is exactly his intention. This is called a leitmotif. It's where you pair a recurring musical melody or theme into a noun. It can be an object, a character, a place, or even an emotion or an idea. The best example of this is Luke's melody in all the Star Wars films. According to Christopher Larkin, he structured the soundtrack around the piano and viola as the main instruments, using leitmotifs through both melody and the instrument use to connect all the tracks together into a complex weave. And as we're about to check out next, this mirrors directly into the intricate level design. One of the really clever things that Hollow Knight does is bring the level design directly in front of the player as a game mechanic. As you're exploring, you'll periodically run into Cornifer, who is also exploring the Ruined Kingdom and is mapping his findings. You can buy a map from him for each area, which allows you to better navigate whatever region you're in. But the maps you get from him are rather bare. Once you run into him, you'll be able to purchase a quill from town that will let you fill in the map yourself. And from here, your true exploration begins. Put into your hands is self-driven map creation. The base maps you buy from Cornifer will give you a guide of where you should generally go, but the rest of the game is mapped out by you. It's also not done right away, only being updated with the rooms you explored once you find a place to rest. It all goes into the feeling of you exploring this unknown world thoroughly, and let me tell you, you will need these maps. Hollowness is a maze-like world and it's very easy to get lost in it. Having a map allows you to get your bearings and plan where you need to go next. And whenever you enter a new area, without a map, you feel blind. Anytime I entered a new region, I felt constantly driven to find Cornifer as my first priority so I could start building a map and understanding the level. And spending so much time looking and analyzing these maps I filled out let me really appreciate how excellent Hollow Knight's level design is. Alright, if you watched my previous video on Beyond Good and Evil, You'll know that I tried taking Mark Brown's Game Maker's Toolkit level design maps and applied them to the game to try to better understand its level design. As a tool, they are excellent, and it'd be great to apply them to Hollow Knight as well. But we have a bit of a challenge. The graph that Mark Brown came up with was specifically designed to tackle Zelda dungeons. Zelda dungeons are contained experiences lasting no more than a few hours. They are digestible in a single sit-down. There's a clear beginning to end progression with detours for the players to navigate. But in a game like Hollow Knight, things are a bit more tricky. One of the staples of a Metroidvania-styled games are their large, sprawling, interconnected maps. Essentially, the game is all just one huge map. Sure, there are clearly defined regions, but there are so many connections between each area and different paths of progression that you won't be completing them one by one. This game necessitates backtracking. Nowhere is this made more clear than the starting area, Forgotten Crossroads. You'll find many possible paths in all directions blocked with no obvious way to proceed. It's only as you progress in the game and unlock new abilities that these pathways become accessible to you. And that's just considering the main required route to beat the game. There are many optional rooms, areas, secrets that you might never even see in your playthrough, and there are shortcuts going everywhere. So how exactly can we capture all of this in a graph? Do we stuff the whole world into one graph? Well, that could quickly become chaotic. But how do we convey the need to explore different areas and backtrack split across different maps? Okay, so I have a possible solution I'm going to try out. I'm going to simplify the progression of the game to only 3 things: boss fights, abilities, and main objectives that go into beating the game. Abilities and objectives are organized into locks, represented by squares, and keys represented by diamonds. A square lock is some obstacle that you cannot get past without the required key. So for instance, there could be a platforming section that you can't do without the required ability. Once you get that ability, you can now proceed. Locks and keys will be color-coded based on the area that the key is found, so you can get an idea of where you had to go to get each thing. And I'm only going to roughly lay out the progression of each area. Also, I'm basically only going to cover the most bare-bones routes. No secrets, no true ending requirements, just what's the bare minimum you need to do to beat the game. So, after a lot of planning and designing, this is the graph I came up with. Now, this graph isn't perfect. I did my best to go through the game and try to remember what abilities and things I needed to do to get to each area, but it's possible I made a mistake somewhere. Also, like I said, this is not exhaustive. Just generally, what's the flow of a typical playthrough? This could probably even be stripped down further with other shortcuts that I don't know about or forgot, skipping the need to get some abilities. But for the purpose of exploring Hollow Knight's level design, I think this is adequate. So I think you can get a good idea of how complex our exploration through this game is going to be. You are constantly needing to use abilities found elsewhere in the game to pass obstacles. Probably the first few areas are the most straightforward. Forgotten Crossroads to Green Path to Fungal Wastes. But as you go, more and more paths open up to you. One of the main things that obstruct your way is this key into Resting Grounds. You need to get this in order to complete your main objectives in the other areas of the game, signified by the stars. And once you complete these 3 objectives, you can just end the game. It's worth noting that this isn't actually communicated to you. You need to essentially discover all these objectives on your own. The biggest helping hand you get is late in the game when a character marks on your map 3 places to go, but you still need to eventually find this tool in the Resting Grounds to complete them. One other thing to note is the shop that you can unlock in the starting area. This allows you to purchase a few things that can give you earlier access to some places, like Crystal Caverns. Though, actually, you might need Ability B for this too, I'm not sure. But regardless, this is locked behind a pretty steep paywall, so while it appears you can get here very early, in practice it's not practical until later. For comparison, here's one of the graphs I made for Beyond Good and Evil. This was a more complicated level, but I think you'll agree it's child's play compared to Hollow Knight. So I don't think you're going to surprise you by this point when I say that Hollow Knight's level design is simply excellent, and exploring this world is a great experience. The thing that strikes me most about Hollow Knight is the amount of passion and attention to detail that has gone into this game. You see it everywhere, from the beautifully unique environments to the soundtrack to all the different mechanics of the game, allowing for many different styles of play. Everything present in Hollow Knight works together, and it works towards you letting you experience the world and its story. And the detail to this end is fantastic. Like I mentioned before, just looking at your map in this game is a gameplay mechanic in itself. The way I played and explored the game was often driven by my desire to fill out the map. There's even a nice little animation for when you're walking around slowly checking a map. And there are characters who are based around this mechanic. Cornifer is essentially going around doing the exact same thing that you are. Or, as another example, let's look back to charms. These are items that exist in the world that other characters use. Some are obsessed with charms. One guy is even trying to make his own charms to get rich. It's not just some abstract equipable, they're grounded in the universe of the game. Or let's go back to the soundtrack and its use of leitmotifs. Like I said before, your exploration of City of Tears is backtracked with this somber theme. And then later on you find Soul Sanctum, which is wrapped around the same phrase. But even later on, you might gain access to a building in the city called the Pleasure House. And in here, you'll find a restless spirit, the songstress Marissa. Before the affliction poisoned its inhabitants of this world, huge crowds flocked to hear her sing. And if you'd like, you can stop to listen to her as well. And this is her song. It's the same phrase that we've been hearing all throughout City of Tears. Now at first you might think, well, she's just singing the theme of the area. Nice detail. But listen back to City of Tears. The main phrase is being sung the entire time by her. That song is her song, and the identity of this region and its people is intrinsically linked to her. This small detail blew my mind because it completely restructured my understanding of the leitmotif being used here. Before, it was linked to the city itself and its somber state, reinforced by the never-ending rain you hear everywhere, even muffled when you're indoors. But after meeting Marissa, these songs are also now about her and what she meant to the people who used to live here. It's a small detail, I know, but it's things like this that give a game so much depth and intrigue past what you see on its surface. There are other examples of cohesion I can give you, like how the game builds your interest and curiosity in Hornet by having her always appear just ahead of you, or how your method of fast travel itself has a story linked to the fate of the kingdom and that you grow attached to it over time. But I think I've said enough to make my point. So this was my experience with Hollow Knight. I loved it, and I'm sad that it's a game that I almost missed entirely if it wasn't for my sister gifting the game to me. But it has easily become one of my favorite games of the last few years. I'm still working towards completing everything in the game, like the new DLC they've been releasing, though that doesn't have any bearing on my review. I should also mention that for the type of game this is, there is a lot of content here. The game can easily stretch over 20 hours with more free content coming out. At the time of this video, we've had 2 updates so far, with at least 1 more coming in the future. I know I didn't really discuss any of them here, but once they're all released, I may make a follow-up if they're worth talking about. With this game's low price point, I think this is absolutely worth a buy. If you have a Nintendo Switch, I've heard they're working on a Switch port as well, so you might want to think about that. Regardless, thank you so much for watching this. If you're interested in any of the videos I've done, well, you could first subscribe, but then maybe check out my Beyond Good and Evil video, or my Science and Gaming series where I try to have science research discussions inspired by video games.